Hello everyone, welcome to Talk of the Town. I'm James Milan. We are in the gorgeous reading room of the Robbins Library, one of our favorite places to be, and we're going to be talking about an upcoming event, a Meet the Author event going on here in Arlington on November 10th. To begin with, we'd like to find out what the event is all about, and for that we have Veronica Rodriguez here with us, and Veronica is an adult services librarian here at the Robbins. Veronica, thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate your being here to explain, hey, what is going on. We'll be talking to the author herself shortly, but we're familiar somewhat with general Meet the Author events here at the Robbins, but I know there's something special about this one, and you had a lot to do with it. So.
Well, we basically want to celebrate National Novel Writing Month, or NaNoWriMo. It sort of gives
and that's November, is that
That's
right?
November, that takes place in the month of November. And it gives aspiring writers, authors, the chance to dedicate the month to make a project and catch up on a project and finish a project. And I figure what better way than having somebody come over from Arlington and talk about their experience as a published author.
So I'd love for you to actually introduce the author who we'll be talking to shortly, and tell us a little bit about how this particular author is going to be coming to present on November 10th.
Okay, so I figured that because November is National Novel Writing Month, I would reach out to local authors, and I found the Arlington Author Salon, which the Robbins Library is a co-sponsor of. And I figure, hey, let's just reach out and see what happens. And Anjali reached out, and that was that.
Here we are.
And it helps a lot that she's a published author, and it's actually Fame Promise of Rain was a best-selling historical fiction novel, if I'm not mistaken. I keep looking back, but and I was interested in the sense of community and sort of showcasing what we have here to sort of celebrate this month that's so important to authors nationwide.
And just to clarify, I think the Arlington Author Salon that you were referring to, that takes place regularly over here at Kickstand Cafe, I think. Is
Yes,
that right?
I believe so.
All right, great. Anything else that you wanted to add in that people should know about either this particular event or?
Well, everybody is welcome, either if you are an avid reader or if you are an aspiring writer, author. It takes place on November 10, which is a Saturday from 2:30 p.m. until 3 p.m. at the community room.
Might be 2:30 to 4, is that right?
2:30? 2:30, I'm very sorry.
That's okay.
So it takes place November 10 from 2:30 to 4 p.m. at the community room downstairs. And we're looking forward to it.
All right, well, thank you very much for your part in bringing this to an Arlington audience, and we'll look forward to talking to you again sometime in the near future.
Great, thank you.
Thanks very much. We're going to take a quick break, and then we will be back with the author, Anjali Mutter Diva, in just a minute.
In Rajasthan, a 5-year-old child is likely never to have seen rain. In the olden days, the children's rooms of the royal palaces were trimmed with black cloud designs so that when it finally did rain, they would not be afraid. Less fortunate children, however, would remember all their lives the fear and hope they felt the day of their first rain. In 1554, Adhira is born into a family of Hindu temple dancers. 1,000 miles away, a new Muslim emperor sits on the throne. Throughout the land, fear of war against his invading army of foreigners abounds. But at home and at the temple, Adhira dances, accepting, magical, divine. Her destiny is to submit to the desires of a wealthy patron and live out her days dancing as a servant of Krishna. Her father will see to this. But her mother, sister, and brother are determined to change her destiny. In the name of family, each keeps secrets about their choices, their mistakes, and their tragic consequences. Then a danger, long present but long ignored, claims Adhira. What happened to her affects everyone, and the family's tangle of secrets unravels, while Adhira dances into a future none of them could have imagined. Every end is, in fact, a beginning.
And we are joined by Anjali Mutter Diva, who is the featured author at this Meet the Author event on November 10th. Anjali, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks
for having me.
Thanks for taking the time to be here.
It's my pleasure. I always like coming to Robbins, especially this room.
That's true. That's true. It's not a great sacrifice in
No.
a lot of ways. But why don't, what I'd like to do is, first of all, start by talking about the event, of course,
Yep.
and your part in it, and what it's going to look like and feel like for people. And then would love to actually take a deeper dive into your own history, your own
Sure.
biography, and how that has impacted a lot of things about your art, and that will be on display at the event. So let's start by talking about Saturday, November 10th,
All right.
2:30 to 4.
Exactly, right here at Robbins. So we've just entered November. November, as Veronica said, is National Novel Writing Month. It's now actually in its 20th year. It started out as an idea to give writers just sort of a boost, an oomph. Like, let's spend the month and write 50,000 words in this month. And that can be the start of your novel. And for some people, that's really what they need. They've been noodling around an idea for a while, but they have a job, they have kids, they have other obligations, or maybe they just have self-doubt, all kinds of things. And so they've never really sat down and just done it. And so this builds a community. There's websites, you can check in with other people, you can set goals, and you don't feel so alone in this endeavor. And for a lot of people, this exercise of doing this for a month, I mean, there's no way you will write a publishable novel in a month. But you can get over that the obstacle, the initial,
right.
and you can really end up with 50,000 words, your ideas, you get going, and after that, then you keep on. And for some writers, this has been the start of their career, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I can really imagine that it's a great, it sounds very similar to, say, what Fitbit is trying to do with exercise and creating a community that reinforces, a single individual's efforts, because, as you say, especially with something like writing, which you're going to have to fit in, either you're going to have to choose not to do other things, or you're going to have to fit this in as you have another job or something else.
Right.
Getting that impetus and understanding, feeling that you're part of a community doing that at a time must be very helpful to get people started, but also I would imagine to get people to pick something back up again, or just to get that momentum.
Right, so it's really often just the start. And plenty of things get written that never see the light of day, but even then I think it's a very important exercise for a writer to do, because there's a lot of writing you have to do that is not going to see the light of day, and there's a certain amount that is going to have to get done. And so maybe that's 50,000 words closer to what is going to get published. So that is this month, and there's the 5 a.m. people who wake up at 5 a.m. and check in with each other accountability. Okay, I'm up, I've got my coffee, here's a picture of my cat on my desk, let's go, write for 2 hours. The Robbins Library, which is very, plugged into community and trying to support not only readers but also writers, reached out to our group, the Arlington Author Salon, of which Robbins is a co-sponsor. And we are a little group that runs a quarterly series, author series, reading series, a kickstand, on the first Thursday of every quarter. And we've been doing this for about 3 years with support from the Arlington Community Council, is that what, ACC, right?
Cultural
Council, thank you. I knew I was saying it wrong. And so that's been a wonderful event that's brought together a lot of readers and a lot of writers from the area. And so Veronica reached out and said, hey, to me, and said, would you be interested in being featured speaker for an event we're doing in conjunction with NaNoWriMo, as it's called, although some people say NaNoWriMo, but it's writing, not reading. So, and so I'm always
National Novel Writing Month. There you
exactly.
go, NaNoWriMo. Got it.
Yeah, and so I said I'd be happy to. I'm always happy to do something in connection with the local community, to support writers, to meet readers, and so that's what we're doing on the 10th. We have a 2-part event. The first part will be me talking about my book, Faint Promise of Rain, which actually I brought with me to hold up, but I left it in my bag.
And that is let's at least get on the table that that's a novel, perhaps the first of a series of novels.
It is the first of what I call a
perhaps?
set, because I think a series people think of the same characters carrying through, whereas this is my plan is 4 individual books that all together tell a whole story, but can be read individually, all set in India. I suspect we'll get into that in a moment. So the first part will be a book talk. I might add in a little bit of dance because I'm also a dancer and there's a lot of dance in the book. And then there'll be a time for book sales and chatting. And then the second part, I really want to address writers, those who are doing NaNoWriMo, but also those who are not. A lot of people are just in a different place in their project. Like me, I'm editing right now, and that's hard to do you can't do a word count for editing. So I'm there in spirit with the NaNoWriMo people, but I'm not participating in that specifically. But I want to talk to writers and talk a little bit about this thing that we do that is so full of paradoxes, where we're at the same time saying, I have this really important thing to say, and I think people should hear it and read it, but then also wrestling with, who am I to write this, and am I going to write it? Why would anybody listen to me? There's a lot of conflict inside writers.
Yeah.
A conflict in books is good and what makes story go, but a conflict in writers can create obstacles. So I'd love to talk to people about that.
Yeah, and I think again, what you describe in what I understand to be the writer's a universal situation for writers is that there you are face to face with either your computer screen, your pen and paper, whatever it is, in the morning. Nobody's telling you have to do this. That conversation's all happening internally, and I think that's where you're saying that that's where a lot of this stuff can come in, where voices that are useful are in contrast with voices that clearly are not, but you can't do much about that.
And sometimes there's also the voices of your children, or the voices of your spouse, or the voices of other people. So it's a constant balancing act, often balancing kind of opposite ideas, opposite feelings. And it's a lot of work to just get through that, which is why NaNoWriMo, I think, is fantastic for just saying, you know what, it's 1 month, I'm just going to do it.
Do you feel like, has the month of November as NaNoWriMo been something that has been helpful for you in your own writing process at any point in the past? Or?
So I actually have never participated in NaNoWriMo. A lot of my friends have, mostly because, I don't know why. I think, I kind of do. I write historical fiction that involves a lot of research, and I just don't write fast. And even if I had 8 hours a day for a month, I probably would not produce 50,000 words. And so it feels like I don't want to set myself up for an obvious, failure. And so I've thought of doing it and just setting my own goal but But then I'm like, I don't know, I don't want to set something that's realistic, because 50,000 words is not really realistic. That's kind of the whole point of launching into it.
Right.
I'm missing the
It's
spirit.
very aspirational.
Exactly.
You're aiming for.
So I haven't done that, but I'm actually pretty good at setting deadlines for myself, and I have a writing group that I meet with once every 2 weeks, and we've done this for 10 years. And we all met through Grub Street Writers, which is a wonderful local, Boston-based writing organization. And so I do have a community, I have accountability. You know, I say I'm going to turn in the next chapter in time for our next meeting. So it's not just all me. I do have my accountability group and my support group that I work with.
That's great.
Yeah.
So I think that we've given folks a good idea, I hope so, about what will be transpiring downstairs in the community room on November 10th. I'd like to now take the opportunity to talk a little bit more about just, the theme of transformation, generally in a single life, perhaps beyond that. And the reason why I'd like to do that with you is because my understanding of your professional path is one in which, when it's not the usual thing that people will go through. So if you wouldn't mind, just take us through, briefly through even your schooling in terms of what you felt you were aiming towards, and then how did it go in college, beyond, et cetera.
Great. So actually this is very timely, because I just signed up to be a mentor to a senior a student at Brown, which is where I went to college, and they have this new program. Actually, it's not new, it's new for me, I just joined it, where they pair a woman student with an alumni. And the first thing when our get to know each other email was, she said, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm interested in so many different things. I don't know if what I'm doing now is what I should be doing, if what I'm doing now is what I'm going to want to be doing. And I thought,
sounds like a college senior to me, and
I know.
especially at Brown.
And so I said, we are perfectly matched, because not only did I feel like that in college, but I still kind of feel like that, and it's okay. I've found a place for myself in this zone of doing many things, and I think that that's something that's more and more accepted and more feasible now, is to not just be, I'm a this, I'm a that. And I have found, with the sort of hindsight of a couple more decades than she has now, that's actually been a theme in general for myself, and I trace that all the way back to my heritage, where I'm half Indian and half Caucasian Jewish, and I grew up in France. And so I was always astride three cultures. And so I've always kind of embodied multiples, multiple things. And that's carried through my education. I went to school mostly in France. We moved around a bunch, but essentially mostly in France. And in France, you have to choose, in high school, kind of you're in a track.
Like many other societies in Asia and Europe,
right.
You've got to make a decision at 14,
exactly.
15 or something.
Science, economics, and languages, literature. In France, there's this added layer, which I think I'm not as familiar with in other cultures, but it's probably there as well, of I was going to say unspoken, it's actually very spoken, unwritten hierarchy. That if you're a good student, of course you're going to go into the sciences. And if you're not quite as good, you'll go into economics, maybe statistics. And then if you're a little less of a good academically performing student, then you'll go into the arts. And then if not, maybe you'll go to a technical school, which is, I'm not going to go into that now, my feelings on that subject, but that's how it is. And so, because I was reasonably, my grades were decent, et cetera, I was very much pushed in the science direction. And my father's a scientist as well, although my mother's a writer. And so I came out of high school, doing well and doing biology and physics and math. And so when I applied to colleges, I had the opportunity to apply to colleges in the U.S. because I'm a U.S. citizen, and my brother before me had gone to college in the Boston area, actually. And so my family was always kind of geared towards that. As a U.S. citizen, I was eligible for some of the financial aid that foreign students aren't. And so I knew that I wasn't going to have to stick to France, which was a relief to me because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I mean, most 17-year-olds don't.
Right.
I mean, some do, but most don't. And so I came then to the U.S. I went to college in Rhode Island, and I suddenly everything was possible, right? Especially at Brown, everything
where
was
there are no-
possible.
right.
It's a very open curriculum, and I took classes in 18 different departments over my 4 years there. And beginning of my junior year, I started panicking that I hadn't picked a major, which is what my mentee was also saying. A lot of people seem to know what they're doing, and I can't choose. And I alighted on a multidisciplinary major, which at the time was called International Development Studies, which was part sociology, anthropology, economics, political science, for me, Latin American studies. And partly it was like, okay, I've done a lot of this already, so I can fulfill the requirements, right? And part of it was because I actually really like that place where things mix. I like not being in a category. I think there's a lot of fascinating things that take place in the intersections. So I did that, and I graduated from college, and I still didn't know, what I wanted to do. But I got an internship, a summer internship at an economic development consulting company in Somerville. And through the 2 years that I spent working there, I realized, what I want to do is urban planning. It's still multidisciplinary. I've always been fascinated with cities. As a child, I was always interested in infrastructure, in the networks, especially the underground ones that make things work. When we had friends or relatives visit in France, I always wanted to go to the catacombs and to the sewers. It's not the two typical places that people want to go when they go to Paris.
Yeah, but they are fascinating. It's just
They're fascinating.
to
It's this
understand
whole
what's going
underground
on
network.
Right. Invisible but vital in every way.
And I'd seen this book that once showed all a picture of if you sliced New York City vertically, and there's here's the ground, and here's all the street and everything that happens, and then it goes down so deep. Everything, the electricity and the water and the sewer and the subway and the cables and
they all have to coexist somehow.
And they all have to coexist.
Yeah.
Anyway, so how things work, the hidden systems that make things work was really interesting to me. So I applied to grad school, and I got a master's in city planning, and I focused on international projects because I always felt I traveled a lot as a child. I'd seen a lot of cities struggle with water and wastewater and sanitation. And so that was what I thought my career was going to be, and I enjoyed it. I worked on infrastructure projects in Latin America, in Turkey, in West Africa, mostly trying to bring water to the outskirts, what one calls the slums of large developing country cities. So it was very gratifying. It was interesting. But so you're wondering why didn't you did you stop?
I guess what I am wondering in part, and I'm realizing as you were speaking that the idea of transformation may not be exactly applicable in your case because it sounds to me like these things have always been. You've always embraced the mix.
It's a coexistence.
Of different
Yeah. It's bringing pieces together.
We might want to talk about things differently, but I guess I am wondering whether through this whole period of time that you're describing. Looking back on it, you felt content, like you were moving in a direction you liked, et cetera, and you weren't, or were you being nudged in some way to hey, I'm not feeding some part of myself that I really, how do you think back on that time?
So I think I was content. I don't remember being not content, put it that way, but I'm interested in a lot of things, and so if something comes along and catches my interest, I don't want to not pursue it because I'm already doing something else. And sometimes I have to. I mean, you can't do everything, right? But so what happened is that all the travel started occurring to me and my husband that when we wanted a family and we wanted kids and I wanted to see them. I wanted to be the type of parent who was around, and that with all this travel, that wasn't necessarily going to work that easily. And then serendipity. serendipity was I was working on a project for which the funding got pulled. It was an infrastructure project, and for various reasons. So the project ended, and I had been hired specifically for that. So suddenly I was out of a job. The serendipity also was that the CEO of the company, the consulting company I'd been working with, was just embarking on working with PBS, specifically WGBH, to create a 6-part documentary series based on a book he had written, and they needed somebody to do a lot of the research and the writing. And he knew me, and through all this time, I've always enjoyed writing. I've always enjoyed reading, and I've always enjoyed writing, and I've always gotten nice comments on my writing in school, on essays, and at work, on projects. And so I always felt like, writing was a thing I was comfortable with and I enjoyed. So there was always that base layer. And my mother's a writer, and my grandfather was a poet. And so I always knew in the back of my head that writing is a respected and respectable pursuit. It's a noble pursuit. And maybe I didn't consciously tell myself that, but it's something that I grew up with.
Mm-hmm. And may I just ask, in terms of your work as an urban planner or your work in urban development, I assume that writing would have been a component of that, but not a substantial one necessarily.
It was, for me, it was a reasonably large component. Okay. I mean, when I was in grad school, I ended up taking half my classes in civil engineering, because I also like the concrete, I like the process, I like spreadsheets. People make fun of me because I outline my work, and then I have this complicated spreadsheet thing to track different things. It's just how I work.
Yeah, I think people may not know that many novelists who love
I'm
their
a project manager.
So.
I worked, so what happened is that the freelance project I ended up doing, 6 months of the writing and the research, opened up to me this world of not having a fixed schedule. It opened up the more creativity. It opened up the possibility of, well, it's not fully full-time, so I can also do this other thing if I'm interested. And around the same time, I started studying Indian classical dance. And it's not completely random. I'm half Indian, so that I had already been exposed to a lot of Indian dance through my time in India and listening to classical music, Indian classical music at home. But I had seen as a child a performance of a type of dance called Kathak dance, which is from North India. It's a storytelling classical art form. It's very percussive. You dance barefoot, and there's a lot of cool sounds with the feet, and you dance with ankle bells. And so I never pursued it. What I did pursue actually in college was martial art, which I very much enjoyed. And so when I had a little more time on my hands, and I had just traveled to India with my husband, who's not Indian. I'd taken him, this is 2001, I'd taken him to India for the first time, and I'd taken him to Rajasthan, which is a beautiful desert area of northwest India with citadels that just rise up from the sand, and a lot of legend and colors, and it's a feast for the senses. Like, yeah, it's kind of a magical place to me. So I'd taken them there, and when I came back, I thought, you know what, I want to try to do an Indian dance class. I came back, it was January, it was New England, it was cold and rainy and snowy, and I wanted to keep some of that warmth. And I looked online. I don't think Google was around. I don't think you used Google as a verb then. So I searched on Yahoo, Lycos, whatever it was, and I happened to find that there was a Kathak class being offered at the dance complex in Central Square, and I lived in Central Square. And so that's around the same time, I was working on this freelance project. I started studying in this classical dance and was completely smitten. And because I had a little more time and freedom of schedule, because after that freelance project, I started taking on others, I chatted with the instructor of the organization, there was no organization, of the class, yeah. Gretchen Hayden is her name. And she had told me, she shared with me her kind of dream to have a nonprofit organization, to be able to go beyond being a student, students with a teacher, to be able to bring in visiting artists, to work in schools, to do outreach programs, because this is a fascinating, long tradition dance form with a long tradition and very culturally rich that mixes both Hindu and Muslim elements and aesthetics and kind of the whole history of India is encompassed in this art form. And she wanted to just have more reach, but like many artists, she was not a business person and thought of everything you have to do to get a nonprofit going. And
Probably had
for
never seen a spreadsheet in her life.
If she hadn't, she was like, ugh. So I said, hey, I'll help you. And my husband at the time was involved with the Volunteer Lawyers for the Arts. And so with a few other students and his help, we did all the paperwork. We held visioning, session to create a mission statement. And a lot of people around then, 2001, 2002, had been laid off in the tech world. And so we had access to people who did this professionally, who did it for free. A friend of mine who used to work at Sapient had a colleague who ran a whole session for us for, virtually nothing to help us do it properly. I wanted to make sure we were laying the foundation for something that could then grow. So I did that. So I was studying dance. I had a little more time. I was writing. And I had just gone to India with my husband back to Rajasthan. And when we researched at the time, still using a guidebook, no TripAdvisor, we researched where to stay. I used a guidebook that had this amazing image in it, or not an image, it was words, but it formed an image in my head, saying that in this part of Rajasthan, in Jaisalmer, this city far out in the desert, it's possible for a child of 5 to never have seen rain. And that because of that, what they used to do back in the times of princes and kings there, is that they would paint cloud designs, black and blue kind of rain and cloud designs on the ceilings and around the walls of the children's rooms. The idea being that then the day the sky got like that and it rained, the children wouldn't be afraid. I have no idea if that worked, but I thought that a beautiful, poetic, poignant image, and I highlighted it in the book. I had no idea then it would be the opening paragraph of my book. And it's the one paragraph that over probably 12 revisions, You never changed. Maybe a word here and there. So it's like, it was really the heart of the book. So all these things came together, and I had this idea of writing, and because I'm an urban planner, I think long-term, long-range, complicated projects. I thought, I'm gonna write the story of this dance. Because it's a storytelling dance, I'm gonna do it in novel form, not as a nonfiction. I wanna engage people, and I wanna share how extraordinary this art form is, whose history has really paralleled the tumultuous history of what became India through Hindu rule, Muslim rule under the Mughal Empire, British rule, independence, and now sort of the connection of the whole global, right. And so I had this idea to set 4 books, each at a time of major change and transformation in the history of India, and to write them as novels, and to set the first one in Rajasthan because one branch or lineage of this art form comes from Rajasthan. And I imagined a little girl being born into a tradition of temple dancers, which is the setting for my first book. And 3 months into starting to do the research and writing, I found out that I was pregnant. And so then I gave myself an extended NaNoWriMo, which is that instead of looking for more freelance work, and in agreement with my husband, obviously, I would spend that time of my pregnancy to trying to get far enough in this book that I knew that after my baby was born and I emerged from that fog, that I would come back to it. Which is the same idea. You write 50,000 words and then life takes over, but you've done that and you're likely to come back to it.
Right, you have something that you can come back to, number one, and you have an investment because you've gotten that far.
Exactly, and so, it's been this interesting zigzag. So I co-founded the Kathak dance organization, which is called Chandika, which now has about 150 students. I was the executive director for 10 years or so, and then other people, nonprofits, you need new management, you need new life, and I was busy, I had a second child, and but I still go for classes. And
Where is that located? Is it at a specific studio? Is it at the dance complex?
so
or?
no, we have location. So we don't have our own dedicated space. This is a struggle for a lot of arts organizations to be able to have the initial, investment to be able to afford a studio of our own. But we rent out spaces, and we have ongoing classes in Brighton. We rent out studios at Mass Motion Dance on Holton Street in Brighton, in Marlborough, and in Burlington is our current 3 locations. And we have classes for children, adults, all levels. We have a performing youth ensemble, which is fantastic, which is already in its, I think, 3rd generation now. We have a lot of students who go off to college and then they come back to live in the area, and they come back to dance, to help teach. So it's been a really wonderful experience. It's a really vibrant arts organization, and I'm really proud that it's so thriving. The artistic director is still there and running it. And so we do performances in the area, and we also, bring in visiting artists. Yeah.
Well, hard to know where to react other than to say that your life is a fascinating illustration of intersection. And as you say, it was in you. It's actually in your DNA. To the intersection of things, and then. It's in your childhood, and then you go to a place. I'm familiar with Brown from. I was in graduate school there for a while, and I know that Brown is a place in which they are
explore.
Looking for intersection because they don't have required courses, course requirements, etc. And then you move on from that into a certain path, but even that path brought you to lots of different places, lots of different kinds of problems. Clearly. You're not somebody who is going to fall into a pattern of repeated experience over time. And I was struck also by the fact that you described it as serendipity, and I think for all of our audience, for all of us, it's important to remember that you described as serendipity losing your job suddenly and surprisingly is what it sounds like. And clearly, that's how it has functioned in your life.
Now, I was supremely lucky to have a spouse who could support us financially. So that serendipity for me, might have not played out the same way in other circumstances. And that's also important to acknowledge and recognize. Yeah.
But a reminder, that's absolutely true. Nonetheless, it's also a reminder that for many of us, it's important to see the opportunity in what looks like kinds of events.
And it's also, I feel like it's more and more accepted. I mean, in the U.S., it's always been more so than, say, in France. It's more accepted to kind of have a second career, or maybe a third. That you're not looked down upon as, you failed in this first thing and therefore you're doing this second. And that was something that really I knew, even as I sensed even as a teenager in France, that I wouldn't have to choose one track and stick to it. And that was very relieving to me. And I talk a lot to kids now. I have a teenager and an 8th grader, and I speak to middle school students and to high school students. And I really try to impress upon them that you don't have to know, and what you're doing now is not necessarily what you'll do later, and maybe you'll change your mind, and that's okay. What matters is that you're always being true to yourself, right? That whatever you do, you are doing it because at least there's some major part of you that wants to do it. And if that major part then wants to do something else, it's okay. Maybe it'll be feasible, maybe it won't, but you shouldn't shut that down and feel that it's a failure or that you're too scattered, or because I think a lot of these experiences, I mean, honestly, if I think I would not have been a decent writer, or I'd had a very different experience as a writer if I'd started writing when I was 20. I mean, so it's all these experiences that came together, and when I had a story to tell, then that's when I thought, oh, I should write a book. And that's different from saying, I want to be a writer, what shall I write about? Which is, some people get there that way too. But the sum of one's experiences just enrich the next step.
Yeah. And I have to say, I'm mindful in what you just said of the fact that my producer, Sarah, and I were talking preceding this conversation, and she brought up Joseph Campbell, an old figure somewhat, and an expression of his, "Follow your bliss," which can be reduced to a T-shirt,
right?
As we understand. But nonetheless, I think is what you're describing, which is that may change, and what's important is not that you worry about that it's changed, but that you listen to what that other part of yourself is trying to tell you.
Yeah.
And
so it's funny, now the whole social media and everything. You have your little, you get the tiny bit of space to describe yourself right on your profile, and so I actually think about that a lot, and I think, okay, what do I care about? What do I want to put as my keywords? And so I put literature, but I also put community, I put cities, I put culture, I put education, and then I think that is the thread, right? There's been this thread throughout that's always been me throughout all these different types of activities. And that's the common piece. So I think if you figure out what makes you tick, what do you care about, and it can take a lot of different forms, but there's still that little sort of kernel that's in each one.
Well, yours sounds like a very rich life. I commend and congratulate
Thank you.
and admire you for that and for building it as such. I know that you'll be sharing one part of that life.
I will. Well, there probably won't be one part. I can never stick to one part.
That's true. That's true.
The main focus will be one part.
The ostensible reason will be one part, right? Exactly. And I'm sure that other things will seep in.
Yeah.
But let's just remind our audience before we close of what it is we're talking about, and I'll let you do that.
All right. So we are talking about the event on November 10th here at the Robbins Library as part of the NaNoWriMo National Novel Writing Month programming, although it's open and everyone is welcome, open to the public. I'll be giving a talk on my book, Faint Promise of Rain, a historical novel set in 16th century India. And then we'll have some book sales and a chance to chat, because I always love to talk with the people who come. And then we'll have a second part of the event right afterwards, where anybody again is welcome to stay, but in particular writers. And I'd love to have a conversation about the writing life and to share some resources that are local to support local writers. And that's from 2 to 4:30 on November 10th.
Or maybe 2:30 to 4, I don't know, we'll see.
It's 2:30 to 4.
That's fine. I'll just remind audiences that if you perhaps are just as intrigued as I by getting to talk to Anjali, she's a regular at Kickstand Cafe here in Arlington, where she not only presides over the salon quarterly, but apparently is there much more often than that.
I do a lot of my writing there.
And I imagine you don't want to disturb her while she's right in the middle of writing, but otherwise it seems like you enjoy engaging with others as well.
I do, and part of the reason I like working in the coffee shop is because of the people I meet. So do interrupt me.
Okay, great. So with that tacit permission, and with our thanks to you for really a very, very interesting chat, which we appreciate. We look forward to next Saturday, the November 10th. And for now, this is James Milan for Anjali Mutter Diva. I am glad that you joined us for this edition of Talk of the Town. We'll see you again soon.